Hi, welcome to Ms. Cooper's art class. Today I'm going to be showing you how I would stipple in black versus stippling in gray, which is actually something that is really new for me. So today I'm going to be using some Pigma Micron pens by the brand Sakura. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the same thing twice, and I'll show you the difference between the different pens. So let's look at what we're using today. So for the microns, they come in a variety of sizes. Here are my black ones. They are in 05, 03, and 01, the smaller numbers being smaller tip sizes. I also have 05s and 01s in darker gray and lighter gray, which is a newer thing. I have actually not tried these before, so my video will be the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the drawing in black. I'll show you how I tackle the different tip sizes and mix those together and how I stipple, and then we'll talk about the gray ones. So what I usually do is I start with the darkest areas, and one strategy that I like is using a larger tip like the 05 first to just kind of establish some of those values, but what you'll notice is it's a little bit rough. It looks a bit like, the front of a composition notebook. So what I'm doing here is I'm going in with an 03 and sometimes an 01, and then I place dots carefully between the larger dots to smooth it out. So there I go, establishing the dark areas with a bigger one. Then I can go in with my little one. So you'll see me do that over and over while I'm working on this drawing of a rose. I'm having to space out the dots quite a bit for some of those lighter areas in the background, just because I am working with such a dark pen. And you'll notice with the gray, I don't have to do that as much. So that was a bit of a relief. I also noticed there were a lot of kind of little veins, I guess. It's hard to describe them in the rose, so tackling those subtleties was really interesting. I chose this image because it's important to me. It's a picture of my husband's wedding band and my wedding band on some of our roses the day after our wedding. But I also chose it because of the textures in there. I liked the veins, I liked the kind of subtle shading in the rose, and I liked the metal on top of it to practice and test out some pens. So again, you can see my big, chunky, not so subtle shading that I'm doing in the background, and then for things like some of the white flower petals, I use the smaller tips for the other areas. You'll also notice from this side view that I hold the pen pretty far up the pen. I try not to put my fingers too close to the tip. That lack of control over the pen actually gives me more control, in a strange way, over the size of the dots that I'm placing on the paper. It makes it easier to place some smaller dots and makes me think more carefully about how I'm placing them on the page when my hand is farther up and I have less control. So again, here's a close-up of me using bigger dots and then using a smaller pen to go in and refine, using that size 01. You can see how small the tip is. You can barely see it when it's moving this fast, and I'm refining that shape. I took about 4 hours of footage for this, but I probably spent closer to 8 hours on this project total, and then condensed it into this approximately 9-minute video if you're trying to get a sense of timing for this. You can also see my nail polish change a couple times in the filming of this video because it took a while. So you can see with the black one, you can see the dots, but I do have a variety of sizes, and from far away it does blend together to make a pretty good effect. I really love that these pens come in different sizes. It is very helpful for me. And all of them did survive the project too. So now I'm going to take that same thing, put it on a different paper with my gray. Again, I'm using sizes 05 and 01. Of the gray, and I have darker and lighter. I kept the pens in the same order that you see them on the table here because that helped me to not accidentally scramble them and place the wrong value in the wrong spot. For the background, I went in with just the light one, which I think in this lighting looks like I'm using a black pen when realistically it really is actually quite a light gray, and it dries lighter than it goes down. So I used the light one for the subtle background shading, and I was able to use more dots for the background as well because of that. So now you can see what that darker gray looks like compared to that lighter one. The one thing that makes it a little difficult to compare, until probably about this point in the video where they've had some time to dry, is that they go down darker than they actually dry. So my strategy for combining the darker and the lighter pens was to start with the darker one, lay that down, mark things out. That makes it easier for me to see regardless of what color pens I'm stippling with. But then what I do is after I let it dry and I kind of combine it with that lighter one, I go back in and fuss with it a little bit more because I can't quite see exactly what the finished product will look like until that pen has had some time to dry and the color has had some time to lighten up. So what I do is, not only now am I combining the larger pen size and then going in and doing the smaller pen size to make it more subtle, but I start with the darker one, and then to make it even more subtle and just add to those degrees of subtlety, I'm going in with the lighter one after the darker one to capture those really light areas. So having multiple sizes and multiple values gives me a lot of control over the drawing. So I was, in some ways, I think a little happier working with the gray ones because I had more control over where my drawing was going. And I think I didn't have to be as careful about where I placed the dots, although you can see I'm still holding the pen pretty high up on the pen just to make it a little more subtle as I went, so I didn't rush it. You can see that I still have enough contrast to see what I'm doing too. I wondered what the contrast would look like when I was going into this because I kind of worried that maybe it would be a little too light. And on the one hand, it's really cool because it could give this a really interesting, maybe nostalgic, kind of old, light, happy, breezy kind of feel for the wedding bouquet and the rings. But I also worried that I wouldn't get enough contrast in the petals and the rings to make them stand out. But I found that that was actually not something that I needed to worry about at all, which was great. So here you can see me finishing up the rose with the light gray in the background with a couple other daisy petals and other things back there. I really found that I did not need dark gray for the background except in maybe one or two small areas. That strategy of layering the dark gray and the light gray was something I think I got the hang of a little bit better towards the end, so I feel like the right side of the drawing looks a little bit better than the left, just because there was a bit of a learning curve. The other thing I was really noticing with the background was with those with the black pens, I had to be very careful about where I was placing the dots for those light values so they didn't chunk together or make it too dark, whereas with the light gray, I really had no fear. I could place more dots to try to build up those subtle values without having to think so hard about it. So I think for future drawings, combining the black and the gray pens would be a really good idea. Before this video ends, I'll also show you a close-up of what's happening, but I wanted you to see me finish up that gray one and get a good look at what that looked like. So now in more natural daylight, you can see the black versus the gray. We're looking at the black right now. You can see the amount of dots I used and how they're spread out, and you can see the wonderful contrast I can get with the black. The gray has a little bit less contrast and has a bit more of a dreamy feel, and I was able to place more dots. You can see those different moods when I zoom out. Now, if we layer them right on top of each other and look at some key areas, you'll see how I placed those dots. For example, in that lighter part of the petal, I was able to place more dots on the gray side to make that subtle shadow you see right there. I used my pointer finger to look at it. You can also see the backgrounds have a bit of a different feel. I was able to capture more of a dreamy kind of feel in the gray that I'm pointing at right now, as opposed to the black. I also was able to make the petal details a bit more subtle and have a bit less contrast and change that mood, which I thought was really fun and cool to work with. In the end, I really enjoyed working with these pens, and I hope you give it a try, and I hope you enjoy it too. Thanks for watching.